Okay, so what I've done here is I went ahead and filled out the rest of the points in our table. So I was working in the previous video, I believe I got up to, I think it was maybe I could complete it up to this point right here. So what I did is I just continued the pattern and I was able to fill in these remaining rows. So then that way I now have a whole bunch of points right here that I just circled in blue that I'm going to go ahead and graph. And again, I was using the unit circle. I kind of was putting an arrow pointing to, on the unit circle for whatever angle I was working with, and I just kind of went with that. And then what I did, I'll zoom in below, is I went ahead and I labeled my graph. So I first labeled my x-axis. My x-axis, I made sure to start my x-axis right there at 0, and then I just spaced out those x labels, and I basically just followed the let me zoom out, sorry. I just basically followed the angles that they gave me. So those angles I just circled in green. I just took those and literally just copied those along the x-axis. Now then for the y-axis, what I did is I looked at my blue points that I've circled in blue, and I looked at just the y-coordinates, and I kind of wanted to see, what is kind of happening with these y-coordinates. So something I noticed is that the lowest y-coordinate, the lowest one it gets down to, is -3. So I'll highlight that in green. So right there, that's that lowest y value. It gets down to -3. So I wanted to make sure when I was labeling that my graph on my y-axis, I wanted to make sure that I show that it went down to -3. And then the highest y value it got up to, it looks like, was about 1. So I wanted to, make sure it went down to the lowest value of -3, and then of course that it hit at +1 on the y-axis. Now just remember, when you're graphing points on an x and y axis, and when you're labeling both your x-axis and your y-axis, you have to make sure you're spacing it out evenly. So for example, I can't just, let me zoom in, like I can't just say like, okay, right here, we're gonna call this, -1 here, but then we're gonna put +1 way up here. That would be way too much of a jump. It would not be, the spacing wouldn't be equal. So just make sure that you're always spacing things to be equal. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and now graph my points, and I'm going to do these, I'll do these in green, and I'm going to kind of jump from my graph up to my table. So let's go ahead and see what my first point is. Okay, so my very first point here, I'll highlight this in green, that is my very first point, and it is the coordinate of 0, -1. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to, I'm going to graph that point of 0, -1. 0, -1. Okay, there's my first point. Cool. All right, whoops, let's get rid of that. Oop. There we go. Next, let's look at my second point. So pi/4, 0.4. So pi/4, 0.4. Okay, so I have pi/4, and I'm just going to have to estimate where 0.4 is, and I'm going to actually just zoom in. So 0.4, we will say is right there, whatever, that's good enough for us. Okay, let's see, next point is pi/2, 1. pi/2, 1. So again, I'm going to zoom in because it's kind of squished. pi/2, 1. We'll put that point right there. Okay, next point. We are dealing with, it's this point, and I realized I made a mistake because it should, right here, it should say 3 pi over 4, because look, our angle right here was 3 pi. Okay, so 3 pi over 4, comma, 0.4. So 3 pi over 4, comma, 0.4. So let me go down, change back to green, zoom in, 0.4. So 3 pi over 4, comma, 0.4. We'll say that's about right there, close enough. Okay, next let's go to our next point. So our next point is pi, comma, -1. So pi, comma, -1. Zoom in, pi, comma, -1. That gives me that point right there. So I hope that you're kind of seeing kind of how these things work. Okay, 5 pi over 4. 5 pi over 4, comma, -2.4. So 5 pi over 4, comma, -2.4. So let's go to that. We'll zoom in. Okay, so -2. Let's say that's about right there. We'll say close enough. Okay, next one. So 3 pi over 2, comma, -3. And remember, that's my lowest point right there. So 3 pi over 2, comma, -3. Here, let me zoom in actually. -3, yay, that's that point, almost done. And then 7 pi over 4 was at -2.4, so -2.4, zoom in, say that's about there. And then my last point of 2 pi was at -1, so -1. And then we're going to go ahead and kind of connect those points, but remember this should be a nice wave-like graph. So we're going to go ahead and connect these in a wave-like form and draw a little arrow to show it goes on forever. And remember, it would carry on in this pattern going on forever. So this right here is our beautiful graph. Well, I guess it's somewhat beautiful, of our equation y is equal to 2 times sine of x minus 1. So that's how you would do it. So it's very similar to when we were graphing our other sine and cosines. The only difference is in this table here we had to, once we found what, so I'll look at our first point of 0. Once we found what our sine of 0 is, we had to multiply it by 2 and then subtract 1. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and then when I come back, I'm going to answer these 3 questions in orange here.